I recognize the NDP House Leader.
Thank you, Mixed Speaker. I'd like to call Bill number 3, Housing as a Human Right.
I recognize the Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Mixed Speaker. I am super excited and positive today to talk about housing as a human right. I mean, if this was an interactive moment, I would say how many of us love the fact that we have a house to live in? But it's not. So I'm just going to give you a few details and facts on some of the reasons why housing should be it, and possibly we could do it today as a human right. So, Mr. Speaker, the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights was written to set a common standard of achievement for all peoples and all nations. The right to safe, adequate, appropriate housing, one of our most basic human needs, is one of those common standards. Canada has signed these international agreements and nationally recognizes housing as a human right. The right to housing is defined as the right to live in a home in peace, security, and dignity, with security of tenure, availability of services, affordability, habitability, accessibility, appropriate location, and cultural adequacy. Our bill that we're debating, or that we will be discussing here today, does some really important things that I want to highlight. First, it recognizes that the right to adequate housing is a fundamental human right affirmed in international law. It requires the government to set clear timelines that will get us to the elimination of homelessness by 2030, not reduction. Mixed Speaker, elimination. Word of the day. Imagine that. Who wouldn't want to play a role in the elimination of homelessness? Well, this bill says that the government will commit the maximum available resources to increase access to affordable housing, which I will say is already started. And we can all agree that this crisis is complicated and it needs multiple solutions in order for this to work. It requires the government to be transparent and accountable to the public by collecting and reporting on housing and progress towards our goals. We want Nova Scotians to trust us. We want community input. We love collaboration, and we need that in order for this to work. This bill recognizes that government has a responsibility to make sure that business activities do not result in a loss of affordable housing in communities. And most importantly, Mr. Speaker, this bill establishes a standard for what is included as affordable housing. That standard is that housing includes utilities, including utilities must not be more than 30% of a household's total income. If it is meant to be affordable, Mr. Speaker, these are all extremely important parts of addressing the housing crisis that are missing from everything the government has put forward. Everyday people, everyday lives, and experiences from all walks of life should always be considered when making any of these decisions. When our caucus introduced this bill in the last sitting, we received a letter of support from the Center of Equality, Rights and Accommodation, and I have a number of pieces that I will table, and I'll hand that to you in a bit. CERA is a leading non-governmental organization working to advance the right to housing in Canada. CERA wrote that it is critical for legislation to be put in place that protects tenants and ensures that they have access to secure and affordable long-term housing. Mr. Speaker, taking a human rights approach to housing means thinking about people and communities, not units and developments. It means starting from the position that no one in our province should go without adequate housing. When members of this government stand up and say there's always more work to do, that is a choice. That is a decision they have made. That it is acceptable or appropriate to them that 544 people in Halifax are currently experiencing homelessness. It is a decision that it is appropriate for 23,645 households across this province to pay more than half of their income on rent and utilities. One of the lessons we have all learned from the pandemic is how quickly and urgently the government can act and make investments when they clearly understand the need. Entirely new programs were created and funded and implemented within weeks when we first began seeing the impacts of COVID on our communities. And we have seen that governments can do this. But we have not seen that kind of urgency or understanding from this government when it comes to housing. So all of these things absolutely are super important. And if you feel like you need to have credit, then so be it. But I'm an advocate for 17,000 members or constituents in my riding. And when I sit in the House here, as well, I'm an advocate for all Nova Scotians in this House. So party politics aside, you know, I'm all about let's just get work done. Let's do what we need to do. Like I said, the work done so far has been minute compared to the amount of people needing homes and affordable housing. Mr. Speaker, taking a human rights approach to housing also means prioritizing the needs of marginalized people and groups living in precarious housing conditions, including seniors, people with disabilities, people experiencing or at risk of homelessness, and communities made vulnerable by structural racism and discrimination. So, previously, we talked about a bill and we talked about generational trauma and the effects of that in the mental health discussion. And we know that housing is an example of a social determinant of health, which can influence health equity in positive and negative ways. Mr. Speaker, last summer, while we were all knocking on doors, and I know we all heard this, during the election, we spoke to so many people who were struggling to find and keep affordable, accessible housing. I had the chance to talk to Fatima Syed, who told us every night, I'm searching for a new apartment, but I cannot afford any of the apartments I'm seeing. I have to move out in 2 months, and I'm worried about becoming homeless. Our neighborhood is growing, sure, but there are people. Where are the people in the community supposed to go? And I can speak that in Halifax Needham, we have a number of developments being built up, and they're being built at a rapid rate. And people in their own communities cannot afford to live in their own community. They're being pushed out because they're not able to find affordable housing because of rising rents and the cost of living today. So people cannot even afford to stay in their own communities, being pushed out, leaving all of their supports behind, their daycares, their schools, their doctors if they have one, neighbors, family, etc. All of those support systems that help foster a healthy living. We spoke to Mike Sangster, who received a letter from his landlord threatening an $850 a month increase to his rent. Mike said, there are no affordable vacancies. Where are we supposed to live? We also heard from Terry Madden, whose income from his Canadian disability pension barely covered his necessities, who was facing a $75 a month rent increase, which he couldn't afford. During the election, myself and the leader of our party spoke with Gary Williams, an artist who lived in his North End apartment for a decade. Right before the pandemic, Gary got a notice that his rent would be going up $400. Gary was lucky enough to find somewhere in his community that he and his partner could afford for now. But another big increase could mean that he would have to move again and leave the community that he loves, and not able to save for a rainy day because monies earned were earmarked for rent. Mr. Speaker, the current housing crisis will get worse, not better. If we allow housing to be more about investment income than it is about people like Fatima, Mike, Terry, Gary, and we could go on and on and on about them not having a place to live. So I want to say, can we, as the Premier has said, invest in Nova Scotians? And that's all that we're asking here. Let's invest in the Nova Scotians that we truly love and we care about. This House has said it many times in member statements and in proclamations and all of the wonderful things that are happening in our community and the people that make it so robust. That we appreciate the people in our communities, and all I'm asking is, can we also help them all live safely? So, Mr. Speaker, I know that the government has made announcements about housing that I'm sure they will tell us all about in the course of this debate, but nothing that they have put forward has shown us a clear plan for, and I'm going to say this word because I think we haven't had this said, affordable housing. And the main investments provide public funds to private developments or rent supplements with no guarantee of keeping prices for housing affordable, and without a clear definition of what affordable even means. So we've listened in on estimates for many days here and for many hours, and we've heard about all of the wonderful programs that this government has invested Nova Scotians' money in. We've heard all about it, and we think it's great because that's where it's supposed to go. Go back to Nova Scotians. So patting yourselves on the back, speaking in a saviorism tone is not the way we respect all Nova Scotians. Once you reach a certain point in our lives, doing the work that we are supposed to be truly doing from the heart, doing the right thing, a stunningly powerful tool becomes available. You no longer need to take credit. So if you have a list and you have to keep listing it, you haven't done enough. So, Mr. Speaker, the Nova Scotia I want to live in is a Nova Scotia where we take care of each other, and we mean it, where we prioritize that, where governments make investments that build strong communities where everyone has what they need to live a good, healthy life, where everyone gets a plate before anyone else gets seconds, but for housing instead. Mr. Speaker, the United Nations set the bar for us to aspire to, for the common standard of achievement for all peoples and all nations, the right to safe, adequate, appropriate housing. That is what this bill affirms. Let us be the legislative assembly that sets the standard. Let us be the leaders in which others follow. Let us stand together for all Nova Scotians. And let us make our constituents proud of their vote for their members. Do the right thing, and let's do our jobs. Housing is a human right, profit is not. That is what I'm hoping all members in this legislature can agree to here today. I've asked this question in many of our question periods about how we feel about that, and we're dodging that. So today, we will know how we feel about housing being a human right for all Nova Scotians.
I recognize the honourable member for Cole Harbour, Dartmouth.